Welcome to Surrender School. This is the 2023 homework group.
Hi, everybody. This week we're going to just be doing a review of steps 1, 2, 3, and 4 because there really wasn't any homework for this week. And I know that our meeting today, or our step study today, we will be going over how to fill in the forms if you are having trouble with it, or if you don't know if something's a resentment versus needs to be on your sex inventory or your fear inventory sheets. So I know that we'll be doing that in the other meeting, but we are just going to go do a quick review. And we never did step 1 in a homework group. So this is just brief. I just threw something together really quickly. So if you guys have something else that you want to talk about, that you would prefer, like if you want to go over your forms, we can do that. We can do that as well. So let's go ahead and get started. So we're going to do the set aside prayer. We'll start with a set aside prayer after a moment of silence. Set aside prayer. God, please set aside everything I think I know about myself, my emotional sobriety, the 12 steps, and you, for an open mind and a new experience of myself, my emotional sobriety, the 12 steps, and especially you. Amen. So this is once again how to get there and what our passwords are. And we're going to start with step 1. We admitted that we're powerless over food, in our case, in most cases, that our lives have become unmanageable. So we're going to look at that step guide pages 4 through 14. And that is just step 1 there. In step 1, there are 2 parts that Lori broke it down into. He talked about the allergy of the body, and then he talks about the mind. Would someone volunteer to read this slide for us? You can just unmute yourself if you can. Oh, will you allow them to unmute, please, Joy?
Sure. Yeah, it's checked.
All righty. If
someone I'll read.
Okay, thank you, Francine. I appreciate it.
Sure. Step 1, part 1, the allergy of the body. Put simply, we have an abnormality of the body. He called it an allergy of the body, which means that once we start eating certain kinds of foods or indulging in certain compulsive eating behaviors, we develop cravings which overpower us. And we have, too, an enormity of the mind. He called it a mental obsession, which means that even if we stop eating those foods or indulging in those behaviors, our mind persuades us that we can return to eating those foods and indulging in those behaviors.
I don't know about you guys. I have never been good at telling my mind just to be quiet and it's okay. It's no big deal, because that mental obsession is the strong part for me, for my disease, for sure. And then could somebody continue on with this reading? And we're on page 4 of the step guide of our step guide, if anybody's following along.
Sure, it's Susan. I'll do it.
Sure.
Thus we can't stop once we start, the allergy that creates cravings, and we can't stop from starting again, the obsession that sends us back. We are thus in a vicious cycle. This is the explanation for yo-yo dieting and for all the despair that we bring to OA when we join.
Absolutely.
Amen.
Absolutely, right? And then he goes on to say, we're moving through this pretty quickly, but he just goes on to talk about the twofold part of the problem. Would someone please read the physical allergy? Just unmute yourself if you want to read.
This is Patsy. I will, if the background's not too bad. The allergy is an abnormal physical reaction to something, In my case, it's my binge foods and my binge eating behaviors. Once I start eating my binge food or indulging in my binge eating behaviors, I find it almost impossible to stop eating it.
Mm-hmm. Amen to that one. That is so true for me. And would somebody continue on with mental obsession?
The mental obsession. An obsession is an ideal which takes control over all other ideas. In my case, if I stop eating my binge foods or indulging in my binge eating behaviors, my mental obsession gives me reason to go back to eat the binge foods or indulge in my binge eating behaviors. My problem in a nutshell, the addict's dilemma. I can't stop once I've started, and I can't stop from starting again.
Mm. I don't know about you guys, but that's so true for me. I think I've used this as an example before, but I remember being 2 to 3 years completely absent, no sugar, no flour, the avoidance of any individual bench foods. 2 to 3 years, and I was in a societally acceptable body. And just like that, something happens, nothing happens. And as we start to see in the steps, it usually has nothing to really do with the food. And I was back in the food, and I just like, oh yeah, I remember going to the gynecologist. And if you knew my history, you knew how traumatic that is for me. And there's a candy bowl as you leave. And I had one, just one little one, thinking, oh, my breath smells. I'm gonna have this little thing. And sure enough, within days, it didn't happen the first day, didn't happen the second day. But man, I had been thinking about it, thinking about it, thinking about it. It took a total of 3 days for me to be going to get Costco size bags of those same little things. So yeah, for me, the mental obsession is what drives me back to the food almost every time. And then he goes on to talk about the phenomenon of craving. And the phenomenon of craving for me was so powerful, completely stone cold sober, completely stone cold abstinent. The phenomenon of craving was, it just had the power to change me. Would someone please read this slide?
This is Sue Allred.
Yeah.
Phenomenon of craving. The phenomenon of craving. Phenomenon is an unexplained occurrence. It is something that happens for which we don't have a clear explanation. We can describe it, we just don't know why it happens. Phenomenal craving is a craving that can't be explained. It just happens. There may be biological reasons for the craving, and we know that there's a lot of research on why people become binge eaters, but the concept of phenomenal craving puts the emphasis not on explaining it, but on making it obvious and powerful. What the phenomenal craving describes is an overpowering urge for more and more.
Thank you so much for reading that. So my question is for our small group today, and anybody can unmute to answer this. What's your story of overeating or food addiction? What does it look like for you to have phenomenal craving? And he says, do I have the equivalent of a gallon of ice cream or goose skins? I'm assuming this just means skins or chips. A huge bag of potato chips or a whole container of cookies, or eating at times or in ways that normal people just wouldn't eat. I don't know what normal people eat like. I've never eaten like a normal person. I don't know what that looks like. But I do know that I wish I could eat like my siblings, where they can have things on the refrigerator and it could be there for an entire 2 weeks and nobody ever touches it. Whereas in my house, if I see it, it's getting eaten. So I don't understand normal people. So what's your stories? If anybody wants to talk about what their experience with overeating or food addiction is, or the phenomenon of craving or powerlessness around food.
I'll share. This is Joy. I was stuck in the food for so many years. And I've always prayed to be able to do anything with my food at all, because man, I would, I'll just share one experience and then I'll tell you what's going on today. My husband, I thank God that he keeps all of his stuff, cookies, potato chips, whatever, upstairs. But that's not very far away. And so many times, even after he started doing that, which by the way, he didn't do for a long time, because I would ask him to take food away or not even bring it in the house, and then I would go out and get it. I would go and think I'm going to take just one of anything, you name it, and I'd end up eating the whole bag and box, whatever, and then go out and replace it, and then eat all that and have to replace it again. Today, I'm very, very grateful to my higher power, because I don't eat that stuff today. I don't know what happened. It's very recent. I've been in this program for a very long time. And my experience is that I never thought I would ever get out of that behavior, because I've always returned to it. And I've never had, very many days of abstinence. I recently got a medical diagnosis, and the last time I did, by the way, got diabetes. That worked, that diagnosis helped me for about 30 days almost. But this one, and I don't know about tomorrow, but today I eat pretty healthy. And I won't go into the details of that, but I still have trouble with quantity. And once, I can have a plan and I can weigh and measure my food, and then the minute I give in to that quantity, I actually crave more of that behavior, which is the constant eating. So I don't eat a lot of foods that I used to, but I still am struggling. And I know I'm in the right place, and I thank God that it's getting better, and I'm learning through the steps and through the emotional sobriety and through doing this, right? Through doing all of this. I'm learning, and I'm just glad to be here. Thank you.
Thank you, Claudia.
Hi, let me just work my way to my bedroom really quick so I can share. Okay. For me, it'll be 2 years this November that I came into a food program. I came into OA, and I started working the steps pretty quickly. And, God started, my higher power, which is God, started working with me on things that I needed to look at for myself. One of the big things was control, like and pages 60 to 63, that was like such an eye-opener for me to see that I am not in control. He is, right? He's the director. And so that was really big for me. So he's been working with me along the way. But I had a lot of resistance to different things. I got a sponsor right away. We did the steps. And when I told her I wanted to do the food, she told me she was only a step sponsor, not a food sponsor. And I didn't know, because I was new. I didn't know there was a difference. I didn't know, some sponsors only did one or the other. And so I started looking for somebody else. I worked with her briefly, and then I decided, because our disease tells us, because I had already done workshops and things, that I knew enough and I could do it on my own, right? So I started doing it on my own way. So I was resistant to getting another sponsor. I was resistant. I would try weighing and measuring for a little bit. I tried accountability partners. But then I went to a meeting and they said, pray for the willingness for the things that you're not willing to do. So that really impacted me. And, the way higher power works, that week I heard it like at three different locations. I'm like, okay, this is for me. So I started praying for the willingness. When I first came into program, I lost like 11 pounds, which was wonderful. Then we got COVID, completely lost the food plan I was doing. And I was able to maintain, which was a big thing. But then I started gaining. Then I was 6 pounds over what I was when I came in. And this was only a few months ago. And I was desperate. At that point, I'm like, okay, God. And I had already been praying for willingness. I'm like, I am willing to do whatever it takes. I am fully surrendered at this point. And within, like, I would say a couple of weeks, I volunteered, or they volunteered me at a conference to do tech. And one of the ladies that coordinated, I really liked the way she handles herself. So I started praying, and maybe and anyway, the way it worked out, she reached out to me and said, thank you for helping out. I'd like to connect with you. So through that connection, she came with a food plan. She's in a different fellowship. And I had heard of this food plan months ago, but I wasn't willing to do it. And I'm like, oh no, that's too much. But when we talked, I'm like, well, what can we eat? And she goes, no, let me tell you what we can eat. And she's reading all this stuff. And I'm like, as she's telling me, I'm getting excited. I'm like, I can do this. So all that to tell you that every time I tried to do my abstinence, I would put down the sugar. But you know how the doctor's opinion says we have to figure out what we're ingesting that's causing that allergy, right? And me trying to do it on my own, I was still ingesting it. So I still had that, like it says, that obsession of that mind, that craving, that once I put all this down, I got to tell you guys, and I know it's a gift from God and I don't take it for granted, but today is 78 days of abstinence, but it's food neutrality. It's not what I was experiencing before, which was white knuckling. I can actually, it's 3 weighed and measured meals a day. I have to call it and commit it to my sponsor, no exceptions, and I don't eat no matter what. And that just no matter what has been huge for me, because I'm an emotional eater, and that's what God showed me. Every time anything happened in my life, whether it was small or big, I would turn to the food. That was my comfort, and rather than going to the source of power. So I need those parameters, and I know it's not for everybody. Everybody has to figure out their own what they need to abstain from, whatever the behaviors. But for me, this worked.
Mm.
And so when I read the doctor's opinion, it became very real for me. That there's an allergy that causes that craziness. So with that, I pass. But thank you for letting me share.
Thank you, Claudia. Marianne?
Hi, hi, Marianne, covering compulsive overeater. Thank you for being here today. Yeah, I mean, I'm looking at this gallon of ice cream. Yeah, I mean, like all of that is normal to me. But one of the things that I come to, which has been my struggle, is always going back to step one. Like, how bad really was it? Is it really that bad? Because as I sit here in the room, I listen to people talk about eating out of the garbage and I was going to say, you know what? Well, I never did that. I never did that. But I have eaten gallons of ice creams. I mean, I throw it up and then go for another gallon. I mean, that's normal, right? But in recovery, there's 2 memories that I had totally forgotten about that, God brought to me that made me realize, okay, not that. That's pretty, something's wrong. One was being in Washington, D.C. at a really nice restaurant. I forgot what it was, but it was something that you could order as much as you want. And I remember just kept on like saying, okay, I'll have another one, till finally the waiter came back and says, the kitchen's closed. And it wasn't closed. It was clearly because whoever was in the kitchen was like, oh, hell no, we're not. And, of course, I was incensed. How dare they? It's because I'm Black, No, it was because you're basically going to like bankrupt the whole restaurant. So it was like, no, enough. And I just remember feeling mortified. And the second one, which I completely buried somewhere, but it came up. So I had to stop judging other people in OA, like, oh, I'm not that bad. Was I probably was like in my teens, and whatever it is, I wanted to fry something. I don't know what I wanted to fry, but I wanted to fry something. And where we were living at the time, we had a mouse problem. And I remember getting the gallon of oil, and a mouse had gotten into the gallon of oil. Okay, I still used the oil and I still fried whatever I fried and I ate it. And I completely forgot about that. Now, I don't think most people would do that, right? But I did it because whatever I wanted to eat, I didn't care that it was a mouse dead swimming in it. I was gonna use it because I needed to eat whatever it was. And when that memory came to me, I was like, oh my gosh. Even then it was bad. It's always been bad. It's always been when I'm in that mode of I've got to have it, just like a drug addict. I've got to have it. Like, I don't care what it is, I'm gonna do it. I'm gonna get it. And so that was a sobering moment for me, but I still find myself, I always have to go back to step one. I'm powerless because my mind will constantly tell me it's not that bad. You're not, and it's always been bad. It's always gonna be bad. I am a compulsive eater for life, and yeah, that's it. Thank you.
Well, thank you. Susan, did you want to share? You were waiting? No. Okay. Did anybody else want to share anything before we go on to the next? Oh, okay. Miss Felice.
Hi, everybody. I'm Felice. I am a food addict. I've been thinking lately about how certain food behaviors and patterns I've been able to let go of, but others I still think of doing and try and make a better decision. So, for example, one of them that is, when you think about the drunk driver, I'm like the drunk food, not drunk, but like person who drops something on the floor while driving and has to reach down on the floor and get it off the floor and eat it. And I mean, number one, I dropped it. Number two, it's on the floor, like, car floors, how, there's always dirt on there. And also it's really dangerous. I mean, honestly, one hand on the wheel, one hand trying to go for something, and I'm not even looking. I mean, it's, just need to say it out loud, completely insane. And am I hungry while I'm driving in the car? No. Is that my food where I eat my food? No, it's not. A lot of anxiety around driving for whatever reason. I mean, certain situations. So these days I'm listening to podcasts and, making calls, or else just trying to breathe and kind of weird driving meditation. Other things that I've done is eating. I don't think I've ever said this out loud before. And I'm in program for a while, but eating food that's just kind of questionable. Like, it's not really fresh enough. It's maybe past its time. Does it reek? No, but is it been sitting there for a while? Yeah. And it's kind of, so, eating food that is past its prime for sure. So what's been happening for me for eating, for times of day when I feel compelled and have to really like redirect myself, it has often to do with doing that work when I don't want to do something, or when I cannot, like, I just can't bring myself to sit down and do what I have to do. It's like it's almost like a deal. Like, if I have that, then I can sit down and do it. And I literally stopped doing this part. It was just kind of some side work that I did. I stopped doing it because I was like, what are you doing? Do you need that money? Yes, but at what expense? Because you're going to sit down and eat yourself through it. So this past weekend, I did pick up some of this work because I honestly need the money, but I'm like, okay, food is not part of the equation, but I could just feel myself like getting like pulled. So made some calls, hung out with people online, just kind of like sat with some people, my daughter, and like while she's watching some dumb show that I would just never want to watch, somehow that helped me sort of create the fuzz, I guess, that the food fuzz creates for me. I'm not sure what it is. It somehow is a distraction that I was like, oh, this kind of feels like the food, but it's not the food. So at least it's not the food. So I sat there and I did the work that I needed to do while, some TV show's going, but that's okay in my book. But I guess I'm just able to identify like the bodily sensation of resistance. I don't want to do this. I'm resisting it, almost feeling like I can't do it unless I have the like food fuzz going. And so if I don't have the food fuzz going, then I'm like on this weird edge and like I feel my resistance. So I felt it yesterday, but definitely was able to just, like I said, have that kind of the fuzz in the background of the TV, and sitting with people honestly helps, but I can't talk to them. You know what I mean? Or I can't watch the show, but somehow the presence of somebody else distracts part of me that allows me to then focus on the work that I got to do. Don't know what it's about, but it doesn't really matter. I'm talking about it. And the point is to not do it and to like, turn it around. But I have to say, in doing some of these resentments or like, fears, it's like, oh, what am I afraid of? And so, turning it over, like, all right, God, like, give me some space to do what I got to do without having to distract myself.
Yeah.
So that's good. I haven't really ever talked about that before. I don't think I've ever really understood it about myself before. So
Well,
thanks for
we appreciate
listening.
you sharing it with us. Thank you. Trisha.
Hey, I got tickled talking about the gallon of ice cream. If we had a gallon of ice cream at our house and I took the first bite of it, then I was going to gently go back and get a few more bowls until I got to the point, well, I might as well eat the rest of the container. That was just the way I did. I couldn't stop. I mean, that literally what it says. Once I start, I could not stop. Well, that was me. I could not do it. Potato chips weren't a huge problem for me, although I like them. I'm telling you, I can eat a whole container of cookies. It's just unreal. I'd sit here by my chair here. I would go to Sam's and buy the big bag of the M&Ms, and I just ate a handful at a time. But before I knew it, I was grabbing down there and the bag was empty. And then even to this day, someone said, what kind of behavior? I can't go into the movies. I get no enjoyment of it now. And I realized going to the movies meant eating to me. I didn't go to watch the movie, I guess. I went to get the popcorn and we always got candy with it. And so whenever I first became abstinent, I couldn't eat that. I don't like that. Anyways, I rarely go to the movie anymore. I do want to go see Blindside, but I don't know if I'll get there. I just have to watch it on YouTube or something, Netflix or whatever. But to me, going to the movies, first thing I thought about was, we'd go buy the container that you could get all the refills you wanted. And I had I keep thinking about this in relations to how a normal eater would do. I've seen normal eaters. And I've been jealous of them. I've watched them. I've seen them get a little bowl of ice cream and eat half of them, say, I'm not hungry for the rest, and wanting to jump on it and just lick it for them, the bowl clean for them myself. I don't understand that. I mean, but the one thing I have learned is my friend, she died from obesity. And we always talked about, we just wanted to be a normal eater. That's all we wanted, was to be a normal eater. And I realize now I'll never be a normal eater because I've got a disease. It's just like, a lot of people can have a disease that I've got neuropathy, and the doctors tell me I will always have neuropathy unless some magical cure comes. So I will always have this disease. I will never be able to eat like a normal eater. So therefore, I have to abstain from these things and just not eat them at all. And I'm going to be finishing up my step 1 with my step guide tomorrow. And now this is my 10th step 1, probably at least, because I've kept going over it. Now I kept missing something. I got in, I reached out to a couple of ladies who are now my food sponsors. They're my accountability partners. And we do a menu for me every Saturday for the week. Now, it's not so strict that if I need to change roast beef and chicken a night or something, but, it gives me a guideline there. And I would have told you today is 4 weeks abstinence for me. And if you would have asked me 5 weeks ago if I could eat what I'm eating right now and be a happy, joyous, free about it, I'd have told you no way. There was no way I could do it. But by the grace of God, that's what I'm doing. And I'm doing what I'm told to do. And I guess I had to just give up. I'm really having a better step 1 experience this time. Thank you.
You God. Awesome. Thank you all for sharing. There's another part of step one that Lori goes on to. Part one, developing a plan for eating. This is page 7 through 9. There's a lot of information on each one of these 5 planned items. One, abstaining completely from individual binge foods. That was the hardest thing for me for the longest time. So I'm like what I just heard. I have to abstain from it completely. I can't have just a little bit of any of it because it just doesn't work for me. Abstain from individual binge ingredients. And for me, it is sugar of any sort. And I'm talking aspartame and sorbitol and all of those things want to trigger migraine, but mostly they trigger my behavioral issues. And then abstaining from individual binge eating behaviors, eating in the bed for me, eating in the car on the drive home. That was a big one for me. And it says also developing in this plan, continue to be honest and careful. It's the honesty portion around my food. Like I've said before here, I am cash register honest. If you drop $1 or $100 your wallet on the floor, you would never have to worry about me stealing that. But if you drop that bag of chips and left me in a room alone with it, oh my goodness, good luck. Good luck with me being honest about it. But I am today being as honest as I possibly can about my food and my behavioral issues that lead me back to the food. So I am being careful about that. And then 5, individual plan of eating. I have found for me in the kind of addiction that I have, whether it's compulsive or whether it's addiction, food addiction, that having a food plan and executing a food plan and doing pre-planning my mood, doing meal prep every week or twice a week has been the best thing for me. So the question is today is, are you holding on to foods that you secretly crave because you can't give them up? Does anybody want to talk to anything about that? Sue, I see that little smirk on your face. Do you want to go for it? Go ahead.
Yeah, I am currently in the space of recognition. You know, I thought that I really understood powerless, and I really thought that I understood surrender, but it turns out that I don't. And this week, I'm learning that truly surrendering, I still want to have my way, and not just the big book allergy regarding alcoholic foods, but my physical, medical condition and well-being demands that I surrender things that I'm still not willing to surrender. And I'm working with higher power, and you know, I'm learning things along the way. And this week, one of the tasks, let's say, that someone who's assisting me in program gave me is, she said, write down the specific brand and flavor and type of thing that you used to binge on. And at first I thought, why am I doing this? I know I can't have chips in my house. I know I can't have cookies and ice cream. And what I realized this week, really realized, is as I started writing those, I literally became obsessed. I'm going through the grocery store, marking where each individual item is on the shelf. And I'm like, you know, this is so little to do with food for me. It has to do with thinking. And I realized that the foods I used to binge on, I had very specific emotions related to very specific foods. So that was like really critical for me to really understand about myself, because ultimately I do have a food template, which I am following. It took me forever to get it designed, and I had assistance in getting it designed. But I'm realizing, okay, this is so much the addiction, the voices in my head. And in my household, he has his food pantry and I have mine, because he eats totally different than I do. It's nothing to do with program stuff. And he has his own fridge and freezer, but I have a condition called voices in my head. If it's in my zip code, anywhere in the house has its own zip code, okay? If it's anywhere near there, I got this chatter in my brain that says, you gotta eat my face, you gotta eat me right now. Come on, I'm here, I'm waiting for you. And I'll tell myself, no, it's stealing. And he says, you can have whatever you want. And I say, no, it's stealing from my best self. It is stealing from my ability to take care of myself medically. So I'm looking at it in a different way. Thank God I'm getting new glasses, as that one book shows. My screen just went blank, so I think I got cut off. Not sure.
Karen, you're muted.
Sorry about that. Joe, if you'd like to share.
It's not, as ever, it's not so much that I would want to share, but I have got a question. Yeah, it's about the controversy about sugar, and just I wondered if anybody could share on it from their experience, because I know some people follow food plan where they don't have sugar after like number 5 in the list. Some people say you shouldn't have it at all. I just wondered like what is people's thinking, and I would just be curious to hear what people said.
Sure. Absolutely. For me, it is no sugar, no flour, because the flour turns to uh, sugar in my body, and I think everybody else's as well. It changes to sugar, and then it kicks off the cravings for me. And I have done many experiments with my body to know that any form of sugar for me actually kicks it off. Now, today, I don't look at fifth ingredient type of food anymore, because I don't know if that was causing cravings or not. I just knew that I would cause headaches, the physical pain of it. So that's why I stopped doing it. And it's also one of the things that the first thing I go back to when I start eating again is the sugar and the flour. And I tend to just stay away from it just because it triggers headaches for me. So does anybody else have anything they want to talk about with how you are treating sugar in your life? Yeah, go ahead, Claudia.
Yeah, for me, the food plan I'm on allows us to use foods that have the ingredient 5 or below, they call it, but I really try not to have any sugar. I just feel like it's safer that way for me. And then also, I did not realize my body is carbohydrate sensitive, so the food plan I'm on is low carbs. We don't have, the only carbs I get is through vegetables, and no starches besides the sugar and the flour. And I think that's really what was triggering my allergy. So that's my situation. And we are allowed to use, I use stevia, but very salt, like on tea, and very little once in a while. But that's for me, and it doesn't trigger anything, so I'm okay with that.
Awesome.
Thank you.
Thanks for sharing. Trisha?
I had to completely come off sugar. I wasn't realizing where all sugar was. And when I've been working with, I say since 2018, when actually Lori's material is where I started. And I just did not realize, even regular bread and just like peanut butter. I never knew Jif, my favorite brand of peanut butter, and I even like the low fat one is my favorite brand. But if you go looking at those ingredients, that sugar is really up there towards the top. And I didn't realize it, that craving that peanut butter. And then I got to tasting it when I read that ingredient, and I said, oh my goodness, peanut butter is sweet. No wonder I'm craving it. So I got me some sugar-free Jif peanut butter. I threw it in the garbage can. I couldn't even stand it. I gave the baby, my 3-year-old wanted to buy it up, and I gave it to him. He went and spit it in the garbage can. I mean, it was horrible. So why was I craving peanut butter? I was craving that sugar in that peanut butter.
Mm-hmm.
And I, through my sponsors, my food sponsors and all, I've learned to really look at the ingredients in every food. And yes, if sugar isn't in the first 4, I could have it technically, but I don't, because how do I treat sugar? Like it's a rattlesnake sitting in there. I am scared to death of sugar right now. Just like if a rattlesnake crawled up in here, I'd be scared to death. That's the way I feel about sugar. It is poison. It can kill me, and I am scared of it. But so I read the ingredients on everything. And if it's got sugar, I can't have that. I mean, even down to, and you can get stuff now that's like taco seasonings and little things like that, all that stuff that has sugar in it. And I said, no wonder I went around craving all the time, because I was ingesting all this sugars. So how do I treat sugar? It's a rattlesnake in my house.
Thank you all for sharing that. Joe, does that answer the question, or did you have further questions before we go on to step 2?
No, that's helpful. I think my other question was just about how eating behaviors, like I mean, for myself, I used to weigh myself a lot. It was one of the things I used to do a little bit obsessively, to be honest. And just to hear like what other kinds of behaviors people have found have made sort of like maintaining their abstinence harder.
Absolutely. For me, I've had several different forms of eating behaviors now. I'm just speaking for me. I've been overeater, and I've also been bulimic. I've been on both ends of the spectrum, and I've done many behaviors to try to control my eating. I'm talking about announcing at work that I'm starting a new diet, and I'm only going to do this only during when everybody leaves, eating everything in the refrigerator. I've tried veganism, I've tried vegetarian, I've tried only eating this at this particular time, or eating as much as I want, because I read a book one time, just eat as much as you want and then you won't crave it anymore. But then what happens with me and my obsession is I now have to have this for the next 30 days. And that's all I eat for 30 days. And I'm so unhealthy behind it. So I've had many behaviors, to include trying to try to control my weight, not just my eating, but try to control my weight. I've gone to binging and purging, and that was when I was in a bulimic phase. And I don't talk about that very often, because the overarching part of my disease is overeating. So does anybody else have any behaviorals that you want to talk about? Okay. All right, we'll go on to the next step, which is step 2. I'm sorry. Go ahead, Sue. Unmute yourself.
When it comes to behaviors, I have what I call sneaky behaviors that it takes me a while to really figure out what's happening. I have one, I call it sneaky peer pressure. It's when everybody else is at a restaurant or eating or going out to a club or whatever, and they're not necessarily asking me to get something because they are, but I have this emotional need to feel like I'm part of the gang. So I want to engage in that. So they're not making me do it, but it's a sneaky where I want to belong thing. So that's one behavior that took me a really long time to sort that out. And when it comes to, I create my own recipes in order to keep my sugar levels in check for myself and my flour levels in check for myself. And so when I'm creating recipes, I have to be really careful when it comes to tasting as I go. And I have to acknowledge that that behavior, if I'm not careful and I don't have a boundary, like 4 bites is my boundary. 4 bites, then I know what seasonings I need to add or not add. Anything beyond that, that's when I become less than abstinent. That's when the compulsion starts in. So I have to watch really sneaky things. And I actually sat down and wrote a list of A to Z, what compulsive behavior is for me, those little tiny things that show up in my life. And now that I've been in program, I can start my AABBCC list, because it turns out there's a whole bunch of little behaviors that I never ever saw before. I just didn't see them. And it's a process for me. Thanks.
Thank you so much, everybody, for sharing. Now that does conclude our step 1 portion of this, and we're only got about 15 more minutes before we have to close this out. So we'll look at step 2, but everything from this point forward we've seen, you've already received, so we don't really have to go over it very much. I'd like to skip over to step 4. We'll just breeze through step 2 and 3 really quickly. Because if you remember, step 1 is, we'll go back to our step 1 here, slide. Step 1 is we admitted that we're powerless over food, that our lives have become unmanageable. And I think we've talked about a lot of unmanageability and how we are all powerless over food. So I think we got that one down pat. So we're going to go ahead and go over to step 2 here. And step 2, came to believe that a power greater than ourselves could restore us to sanity. We're on page 15 of the study guide if you're following along. In step 1, we found complete despair, powerlessness. We cannot solve the problem of our compulsive overeating on our own. And in step 2, we'll find hope. We'll find a power greater than ourselves that can restore us to sanity. Why then? So we're having to rely on a power greater than ourselves. Why would we rely on a power greater than ourselves? What would interest us to going to a higher power? And then he comes over here and he says 2 things. The religious person will someday sponsor. You might someday turn around and sponsor. And then he also says there's an extremely important page in the big book, which the person believes in God, but who is still suffering from compulsive overeating ought to understand if he or she is to recover. So you may come across somebody, or you may be yourself, that you believe in God 100%, but you're still compulsive overeating. So this is why we have to now trust a power greater than ourselves to believe in. So we'll go on to the next slide. And then he talked about the double whammy. Would somebody please read this slide?
I can read.
Good. Yeah, go ahead.
Okay, we understand the double whammy of not being able to stop when we start. It's a physical allergy. And of not being able to stop from starting again, the mental obsession, and realize that there is no hope for us on our own. Because we have this mental obsession, we are insane. We need to have constant sanity to be able to say, I don't want to eat foods or indulge in eating behaviors that cause me uncontrollable cravings.
Joe, would you read this slide? Because
Yeah.
this is from the big, by the way.
Okay, sorry. What was
Okay.
Bill to do?
Oh, wait a
He
minute.
saw his-
Joe, I was going to ask Joe too. She raised her hand.
I'm sorry. I'm sorry. I thought you wanted me to continue.
No. That's okay. Joe, would you read this slide for me?
Yeah, no, it's fine. What was Bill to do? He saw in his friend a real miracle. Like myself, he had admitted complete defeat. Then he had, in effect, been raised from the dead, suddenly taken from a scrap heap to a level of life better than the best he had ever known. Had this power originated in him? Obviously it had not. There'd been no more power in him than there was in me at the minute, and this was none at all. Never mind the musty past. Here sat a miracle, directly across the table. He shouted great tidings. Page 11 and 12.
Thank you. And that's from the big book. It's 15 on our study guide. Bill does, if you'll remember what was happening here, and I'm going to go ahead and skip this slide, but you'll remember Bill is sitting down with Ebby in the moment, and he was like, Bill, what are we arguing about here? Why don't you find your own concept of a higher power? And Bill's like, well, I can do that. I can find my own concept of something I can believe in. And that's what that was what that conversation was basically about. And then also it goes on to talk about, in We Agnostics, there are 3 sections that he talked about. There are 3, that the chapter is divided into 3. He talked about the first section poses the essential dilemma facing a person who doesn't believe in God. And then 3 powerful arguments of why we should be willing to find a higher power. And in the 3rd section, he talked about the reality of fundamental belief, and is the section of extreme importance to the believer as well as to the non-believer, but the person who's still suffering from their addiction. And then he actually goes on to talk about there is the spiritual experiences, which is in the back of the big book. Would someone please read this? Because this is pretty powerful. You can just unmute. Go ahead, Susan, if you want to unmute. I'm sorry.
Third, it contains that wonderful quote wrongly attributed to Herbert Spencer. There is a principle, which is a bar against all information, which is proof against all arguments, and which cannot fail to keep a man in everlasting ignorance. That principle is contempt prior to investigation. Whoa.
Thank you. Yeah, that's pretty powerful because for me, I walked in the door having a belief of what my parents thought of had a higher power and with their belief system, but I didn't have my own experience with a higher power at all. So I was introduced to that in these programs. As a matter of fact, I had a sponsor once to tell me, she said, Karen, who are you praying to? She said, your God sounds horrible. Why don't you borrow mine for a while? Because my God is loving and compassionate. And at that moment, I realized that I had a very punitive God. And I'm going to go and skip this section. What do we say to a person who doesn't believe? I want to go ahead and read that though. This from page 18 in our book there. Can someone read that for us?
I will.
Please.
What to say to the person who doesn't believe in God? The question to ask, therefore, of people who don't believe in God is what concepts or ideas or feelings they do believe in and that are more important than they are. What gives them any meaning at all in their lives?
Thank you. So I'm going to go ahead and go down to the last one. And we're just going to wrap up step 2 with this, and then I'll ask the quick question, and then we'll close it out with step 2, because we've seen step 3 and step 4 because we've done that just a couple of weeks ago. But would someone follow up and read the final slide in step 2 here, and then we'll talk about step 2.
Well, who is that? Oh,
doesn't matter. Just go for it.
Okay. Step 2 only requires that we be willing to try to find a higher power. That's all. Our willingness is enough to start the process of working the 12 steps. Want me to carry on?
Yes, please.
Oh, sorry. When we work the 12 steps, we find that automatically, guaranteed by the end of step 9, we become sane in relation to food. Without any effort on our part in dealing with food, see the hidden promises at the bottom of page 84 and top of page 85.
Yes, and that was from the big book he's referring to. Now, I'm going to go ahead and just freeze there and stop there for a moment, and we can probably in the next 5 minutes. I would like to hear what your experience is with step 2, learning to believe and trust in a higher power and turning your food problem or your behavioral problems around food over to a power greater than yourself, or what that looked like for you to come to believe. Yeah, please go ahead, Sue.
When I started this, I had confusion around higher power, and I just couldn't wrap my brain around it at all.
Mhm.
And someone in a emotional sobriety group said something to the effect of, what do you believe in? And then he asked something to the effect of, what do you really believe in? And the only thing at the time that I could come up with was, I believe in reality and my perception of reality. And that's all I can believe in. And since I've been going further into the big book, that's still on my struggle days, as I call them, is my higher power, because on page 55, and it says anywhere in the big book when something is capitalized, that's another name for higher power. And it's like the third paragraph down on 55, it says, we found the great reality deep down within us. And then on page 417, it says, until I could accept my alcoholism, I could not stay sober. Unless I accept life completely on life's terms, I cannot be happy. And until I can accept that I'm a food addict, well, I can't be happy. And then on page 559, at the bottom of the page, it also says, above all, you must reject fantasizing and accept reality. And all of those apply to everything in my life, for everything I have to accept day to day, including my food addiction. that helped me a lot. And it actually helps bring me back to step 1 every day, because I didn't understand the word unmanageability, but I do understand the word unpredictable. And I have very unpredictable food behaviors. So it all linked together for me. And I'm trying to understand a higher power. And I know that I'm getting to know this thing being whatever. But that's my fallback, because I believe reality. And I believe what happens to me is real. And that helps me find my way along this process. Thanks for listening.
Amazing. Thank you so much. Does anybody else have anything they'd like to share on step 2 regarding coming to believe? Because we can just read the first top of page of step 3 and then we'll close it out. We will have regular homework next week, by the way. And so before we get to that, we'll have regular homework to do. But this was just a quick review, and you guys have the PDF file if you're on the WhatsApp. I put that out there. So I'm going to go ahead and just read step 3, and then we'll close out with step 3. There we go. Okay. Oops, I'm sorry about that. All right. Step 3, made a decision to turn our will and our lives over to the care of God as we understood him. And I think it's really important, that last part, as we understood him, because forever I was trying to understand God as you understood him, as my father understood him, as my sister understood him, but never as me and you understood him together. So that was a big item there. Before we go on, we have about 1.5 minutes or so. Does anybody have anything they want to share on step 3? And then we'll go ahead and just close out with the serenity prayer. Is anything that lights up for you on making the decision to turn your will and your life over, or questions? All righty then. Well, ladies, it has been such a pleasure, a big pleasure. So we're going to go ahead and close out with the serenity prayer so that Miss Joy can start the session. And remember, we'll be talking about step 4 in the other session today. And there'll be help for completing your sheets, your resentment, your fear, and sex conduct sheet. I know that we didn't get to those. There's some really lively conversations with step 1 since we had never really covered it in homework. So I thank you so much for your honesty and your openness today. And with that, we'll close with a moment of silence and the serenity prayer.
See you next week.